I never thought the person I loved most in this world would be the one to destroy me. My own brother, the boy I grew up with, the boy I defended, the boy I trusted more than any, nested me in the back in a way that still makes my chest burn when I remember it. It all began the day we lost our father. The funeral was quiet, too quiet, like the air itself didn't want to move. I remember standing by the grave, my hands shaking as the cold wind cut through my suit. My brother Daniel stood beside me, his face blank, his jaw tight, and for the first time I noticed something I had never seen in him before. Not grief, not sadness, but calculation. I brushed it off at the time. I told myself it was just the way people deal with pain, and Daniel had always been the type to hide his feelings. But I was wrong. That silence wasn't about pain, it was about greed. After the ceremony, the lawyer gathered us in Father's old study. The air smelled of wood polish and dust, and every book on the shelves felt like a ghost watching us. I sat down, my heart heavy but calm, ready to hear the will. Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed as though he already knew what was coming. I still remember the lawyer's voice, slow and deliberate as he read out the details. Father had left us both equal shares of his estate, half for me, half for Daniel. It wasn't much compared to some families, but it was everything Father had worked for his whole life. A modest house, some savings, a few pieces of land. I felt relief. At least this part was fair. But when I glanced at Daniel, he didn't look relieved. He looked hungry, like someone who wanted more than what was given. That night I tried to talk to him. We should honor Dad's memory, I said, my voice soft, hoping to bridge whatever distance had formed between us. We should keep things fair, like he wanted. Daniel's eyes flickered in the dim light of the kitchen, and for a moment I saw something cold in them. Fair, he repeated, almost like a joke, before walking away without another word. I should have known then. I should have seen what was coming. But love blinds you, doesn't it? And I still believed my brother would never betray me. The weeks after the funeral were heavy, but I tried to focus on rebuilding my life. I went back to work, I called old friends, and every evening I stopped by Father's house to sort through his belongings. The house was full of memories. From the worn armchair where he used to read the newspaper to the creaky stairs that groaned under every step. I thought Daniel would be by my side, but he was always too busy. At least, that's what he told me. Meetings, he'd say. Business to handle. I didn't question it. I thought maybe he was dealing with his grief in his own way. One day I came to the house earlier than usual, and my stomach dropped when I saw Daniel's car already parked outside. I walked in and found him in the study, papers scattered everywhere, his face tight with concentration. He jumped when he saw me. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He forced a smile, his hand clutching a stack of documents. "Just organizing," he said quickly. I didn't believe him, but I didn't push. I told myself not to create problems where none existed, but the unease grew stronger each day. A few weeks later, the lawyer called me in for a meeting. His tone was heavy, almost apologetic, as he explained the situation. Somehow, my name had been removed from several of the documents regarding Father's assets, the land, the savings account, even parts of the house deed, all transferred under Daniel's control. My heart stopped. "That's impossible," I whispered, shaking my head. The will was clear, half and half. The lawyer sighed. I thought the same, but the signatures. He pushed the papers toward me, and I felt the world tilt. My signature was there, scrawled across documents I had never seen before. My hands trembled as I touched the ink. It wasn't mine. It couldn't be mine. Daniel had forged it. Betrayal doesn't hit like a sharp knife. It's slower, deeper, like poison spreading through your veins. I felt sick, my vision blurring as the reality set in. My own brother had stolen everything from me, using my name, my trust, to strip me of what Father had left behind. I wanted to confront him right then, but fear stopped me. What if I was wrong? What if I couldn't prove it? Still, deep down, I knew. The brother I loved had become a stranger. That night I barely slept, my mind racing with questions and rage. I stared at the ceiling in the darkness, hearing Father's voice in my head, telling me to protect family, to stand together no matter what. But how could I stand with someone who had betrayed me so cruelly? By morning, my anger had solidified into determination. I drove to Daniel's house, my fists gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. When he opened the door, he looked surprised, maybe even a little guilty, but his expression quickly hardened into that same cold mask I had seen at the funeral. "We need to talk," I said, pushing past him into the living room. Papers were stacked neatly on the coffee table, and I recognized them immediately. Father's documents, the ones that had been altered. My chest tightened. "You forged my signature," I said, my voice low, trembling with fury. He smirked, leaning against the wall like this was nothing more than a casual conversation. "Prove it," he said simply. Those two words cut deeper than any knife. He wasn't even denying it. He was daring me. I felt my hand shake, my vision blur with hot tears, but I refused to let him see me break. "How could you do this? To me, to Dad's memory?" My voice cracked, but my eyes stayed locked on his. Daniel shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. Dad worked hard his whole life, but he never understood value. He gave too much, trusted too easily. I'm not like him. I know how to use what he left us. I shook my head, disbelief turning into disgust. No, Daniel, you're not using it or stealing it. You're spitting on everything he stood for. For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes, a trace of guilt maybe, but it was gone in a heartbeat. You were never cut out for responsibility, he said coldly. I'm doing you a favor. My hands curled into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. Fighting him here, in his home, wouldn't solve anything. He had already prepared for this. He had already decided that blood meant nothing compared to greed. I walked out without another word, but inside, something was breaking. My brother was gone. The boy I grew up with no longer existed. And in his place was a man I didn't recognize. A man I would have to fight if I wanted justice. Asterisk, I drove away from Daniel's house with my hands trembling so badly I could barely keep the wheel steady. My chest burning with a mix of fury and heartbreak that made it hard to breathe. The streets blurred past me, headlights slicing through the night like sharp blades. But my mind wasn't on the road, it was on every moment Daniel and I had shared as kids. Every promise we made to stand by each other no matter what. And how all of that had shattered in an instant. When I finally reached Father's house, I sat in the driveway for nearly an hour, staring at the old windows glowing faintly from the porch light, remembering how safe this place used to feel. Now it was nothing more than a battlefield, a monument to betrayal. I went inside, and the silence was suffocating. I sat at Father's desk, the same desk where he once taught me how to write my name, the same desk where he had scribbled out his will, and I placed my hands flat against the cold wood. I whispered to him like he could still hear me. My voice shaking, I won't let him get away with this, Dad, I promise. For days I kept trying to convince myself there had to be a mistake, that maybe Daniel had panicked and done something stupid but could still be reasoned with. I called him again and again, but every time he either ignored me or answered with that same cold arrogance, reminding me that the documents were signed and there was nothing I could do. I started gathering evidence, combing through old files, comparing signatures, even speaking to the lawyer about handwriting analysis. The more I dug, the more I realized how carefully Daniel had planned everything. He had gone through Father's files before me, chosen which assets to transfer, even practiced my signature enough to make it look almost perfect. Almost I noticed small details slant of the letters. The uneven spacing that didn't match mine. It was enough to give me hope. But hope was a dangerous thing. It lit a fire inside me, but it also made the betrayal sting deeper. Because it meant Daniel's actions weren't a mistake. They were deliberate, calculated, and heartless. As I sat there surrounded by papers, the reality became clear. My brother wasn't going to stop, and if I didn't act soon, everything Father left behind would vanish forever into Daniel's greedy hands. Asterisk. The breaking point came when I visited Father's land one afternoon. A small plot on the edge of town where he used to take us as children to fly kites and picnic under the tall oak trees. It was a place that carried the sound of our laughter, a place where we buried time capsules and made promises about the future. But when I arrived, the land was no longer ours. Construction equipment stood like giant vultures on the soil, tearing into the earth as if it had no history, no memories. My stomach dropped as I saw Daniel standing there in a crisp suit, shaking hands with a man in a black car. They laughed together, talking about deals and profits, as though the land was just dirt and stone. My voice cracked when I shouted, "What are you doing, Daniel? This is Dad's land." He turned, his expression cold, his eyes narrowing like I was a stranger trespassing on his property. "Correction," he said sharply. "It's my land now. You had your chance, but you were too weak to take it." Rage surged through me, my fists tightening at my sides. "Weak? You forged my name. You lied. You stole from your own brother." The man in the black car raised an eyebrow, clearly uncomfortable, but Daniel didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only I could hear. "Grow up. The world doesn't reward sentimentality. Dad's gone, and what he left behind belongs to the one strong enough to claim it. That's me." My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst, and in that moment, I realized I couldn't beat him with anger alone. Daniel had money, connections, and forged documents that made his lies look like truth. But I had something he didn't, father's memory and the strength of knowing I was on the side of what was right. I forced myself to turn away, even though every part of me wanted to fight him right there in the dirt. As I walked back to my car, tears stung my eyes, but deep inside, something hardened. If Daniel thought he had broken me, he was wrong. I was done begging, done reasoning. If he wanted a war, I would give him one, and it would begin with a letter he would never forget. Asterisk. I sat at Father's kitchen table that night with a single lamp casting a small circle of light over the paper in front of me, and I felt something I hadn't in weeks control. The idea of a letter came to me not as revenge, but as a way to reclaim my voice. If Daniel had taken everything material, he could never take what I chose to say. I pulled a fresh sheet from the drawer and began to plan. The letter had to do more than accuse. It had to cut to the truth that would haunt him, to expose his choices in a way that would make him feel the weight of what he had done. I wanted him to know how hollow his victory would be. I wanted him to remember our father, not as a ledger, but as a man who taught us to be honest. I thought of the small details Daniel missed, how father used to sign his letters with that looping flourish on the tail of the R, the way he always tucked a pressed leaf into the pages of books he loved, the smell of pipe tobacco that lingered on his coat. Those memories would be my armor. I could write about the land where we flew kites, about the nights father stayed up fixing the fence so our dog wouldn't escape, about the secret nickname he had for Daniel when he was little. I would write it all in plain language, nothing fancy, because plain words cut truer. I imagined Daniel reading it at his marble kitchen island, his coffee forgotten, his face flushed as my words stripped away his justifications. But I also knew a letter alone wouldn't undo the forged documents, so the letter would be part confession and part trap. I began drafting lines that would lead him to make a mistake, lines that hinted I had found proof hidden where only a son would look. An old shoebox under the loose floorboard in father's study, the same study where the will was written. If you want what's left of his memory, the letter would say, meet me at the study at noon on Saturday. Bring the documents you think you own. I would make it sound vulnerable, even foolish, so he would come confident and careless. And while he came expecting a private conversation, I would have the lawyer there, the handwriting analyst, the neighbors who remembered when he first started changing the deeds. The thought made my chest tighten with fear and a strange thrill. This was risky. I might be walking into deeper danger, but letting him keep everything was no longer an option. The paper trembled under my pen as I wrote the final line. I forgive you if you choose to make this right. Saturday came faster than I expected, and the weight of what I was about to do pressed down on me like a storm cloud that refused to move. I woke up before dawn, my stomach twisted in knots, my hands cold despite the summer heat. The letter had already been delivered to Daniel 3 days earlier. It slipped under his door in the dead of night, and every hour since then I imagined him reading it, crumpling it, laughing at it, or maybe feeling a flicker of shame. But knowing Daniel, shame was too fragile an emotion for him. Still, I clung to the hope that curiosity and arrogance would drive him to show up. By noon, the study was ready. The air smelled of old wood and dust. The curtains drawn back to let the sun spill over father's desk, the very heart of the house. I had asked the lawyer to wait in the adjoining room, along with the handwriting analyst and a family friend who had agreed to be a witness. They were silent allies, hidden but ready. My pulse pounded in my ears as I sat in the chair by the desk staring at the door, rehearsing in my head what I would say when he walked in. At exactly 12:15, the front door creaked open, followed by the heavy echo of footsteps on the wooden floor. My chest tightened, and when Daniel appeared in the doorway, he was carrying a folder tucked under his arm, his expression smug, almost amused. "So this is your big plan," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he glanced around the room. A little family intervention. I forced myself to stay calm, even though every instinct screamed at me to shout. "Sit down," I said firmly, gesturing to the chair opposite mine. He smirked but obeyed, sliding into the seat like he owned the place. For a moment, silence stretched between us, filled only by the ticking of father's old clock on the wall. Then I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. "You forged my name, Daniel. You stole from me, from Dad's memory, from everything he built. And you know it." His lips curved into a cold smile. "Prove it," he whispered again, just like before. But this time, I wasn't alone. This time, I had witnesses. This time, his arrogance would cost him. I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I reached under the desk and pulled out the folder the lawyer had given me, thick with papers and notes, and placed it on the table between us. Daniel's eyes flicked down to it, his smirk faltering for just a second before returning like a mask. "What's this?" he asked, his tone dripping with false boredom. "Evidence," I said calmly, though my hands trembled beneath the table. I opened the folder and spread out the copies of the forged documents next to samples of my real signature, each one marked with the handwriting analyst's notes. "You see here," I pointed to the uneven loops, the mismatched pressure points on the pen strokes. "This isn't me, it's you, and I can prove it." Daniel leaned back in his chair, chuckling softly as if this was all a game, but I could see the flicker of tension in his eyes. "So you've got some expert to scribble notes. That doesn't mean anything." His voice was sharp now, the edges cracking. I didn't flinch. I reached into the second envelope and slid out a small, weathered notebook, father's notebook where he had jotted reminders and kept private thoughts. "This is Dad's handwriting," I said, "and he wrote about his will. He wrote that he wanted everything split between us. I don't just have an expert, Daniel, I have Dad's own words." For the first time, his smirk vanished completely, his jaw tightening as he stared at the notebook like it was a weapon pointed at him. "You're bluffing," he muttered, but his voice lacked the confidence it had before. That was my cue. I raised my hand, and the lawyer stepped out from the adjoining room, followed by the analyst and our family friend. The air shifted immediately, heavy with judgment and truth. Daniel's face went pale, his eyes darting from one person to another as the walls closed in around him. "You set me up," he hissed, slamming his hand on the table. "You think this changes anything?" My voice was steady now, stronger than I ever imagined it could be. "It changes everything. You wanted me to prove it. Well, here's your proof. And now everyone sees what you've done." His mask cracked then, his arrogance slipping into raw anger. His fists clenched so tight I thought his knuckles might break, but I didn't move. For the first time, he was the one cornered, and I was the one holding the truth. Asterisk. Daniel shot up from his chair so fast it nearly toppled backward, his face flushed red, his eyes burning with the fury of someone who had finally been exposed. "You think you're smart," he spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Dragging people in here to humiliate me, to make me look like the villain. You don't understand how the world works." His voice shook the walls, but I didn't move. The lawyer calmly slid the copies of the documents across the table, his tone measured. "Mr. Daniels, these signatures will not hold in court. This is fraud. If you don't cooperate, we'll be forced to escalate legally." Daniel's fists slammed onto the desk, making the papers jump, and for a second I saw the boy he used to baby brother who used to cry when we lost our kite in the trees, the one who used to share his last piece of candy with me. But that boy was gone, buried beneath layers of greed and pride. He leaned across the table, his face inches from mine, his breath hot and ragged. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "You think you've won, but you've made me your enemy now, and I don't lose." My heart pounded, my body trembling, but I refused to look away. "You already lost the moment you chose money over family," I said, my voice steady, each word heavy as stone. The room was silent for a beat, only the ticking clock filling the space. And then Daniel let out a bitter laugh, scooping up his folder of forged papers. "This isn't over," he muttered, storming out of the study, his footsteps echoing through the empty halls like thunder fading into the distance. The moment the door slammed shut, my knees almost gave out, and I collapsed into the chair, my chest heaving with a mix of relief and sorrow. The lawyer placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "He won't get far. With what we've gathered today, you have more than enough to challenge everything he's done." But as I sat there, surrounded by witnesses and evidence, all I felt was the ache of loss. I hadn't just fought for father's estate, I had fought against my own brother, and though I had won a battle, it felt like I had lost something far greater, the bond we once shared. Asterisk. In the weeks that followed, the legal process began to unfold like a storm finally breaking over dry land. The evidence we had collected was more than enough to challenge Daniel's forged claims, and with the lawyer guiding me step by step, the courts began to strip away the false documents he had so carefully crafted. The land, the savings, even the house deed of it was restored to the rightful division father had intended. I should have felt triumphant, and in a way, I did, but there was also a heaviness inside me that victory couldn't wash away, because at the end of it all, I hadn't just fought for property, I had fought against blood. Against the brother I once trusted with my life. I remember standing in father's study one last time, the air thick with dust and memories, and looking at the desk where this war had begun. On it sat the letter I had written to Daniel, the one that lured him into revealing his own guilt. And I realized that letter was more than a trap, it was a mirror. Every word I wrote had forced him to confront the man he had become, and though he may never admit it, I knew those words would haunt him long after the ink had dried. Friends and family told me I should feel proud for standing up, for not letting myself be crushed under betrayal, but pride was a strange thing. What I felt was stronger than pride. I felt resilient. I had walked through fire and come out scarred but still standing. And as for Daniel, he disappeared from my life after the court ruling. No calls, no letters, no apologies. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if he ever reads my letter again. If he hears father's voice in the back of his mind, reminding him of the values he threw away. Maybe one day he will change. Maybe not. But I have made peace with it. Father once told me that family isn't just about blood, it's about loyalty, love, and trust. Daniel chose greed over all three, and that was his burden to carry. As for me, I chose to honor father's memory by rebuilding my life, not with bitterness but with strength. Betrayal may have broken my heart, but it also awakened a part of me I didn't know existed, part that refuses to be silenced, the part that survives. And that, I realized, was my true inheritance.